This is our second Visiting Artist Series event this academic year. Our Visiting Artist Series is a collaboration between the Cleve Carney Museum of Art, Fine Art, Architecture, and Photography programs. Before we start, a reminder that the next event, a lecture by Alberto Aguilar, will be on November 9th at 1 p.m. Also, a gentle reminder asking everyone to silence their cell phones. If you must leave before the lecture ends, please do so quietly through the back exit. Today, we are very excited to have with us Brian Harper. Brian holds a BFA from Northern Arizona University and an MFA from the University of Iowa. Brian is an associate professor of fine art and head of the ceramics area at Indiana University Southeast. Brian is well known for being the founder and executive director of Artaxis, an art organization that engages the ceramics community through promotional, educational, and networking programs. His artwork has been exhibited extensively in national and international exhibitions. Please join me in welcoming Brian Harper.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Marina, for hosting me and bringing me here. I really appreciate all the work that you've put into it. Mara, thank you for letting me crash your classes yesterday and today. And I have really, this is the first time I've been here. I've really enjoyed meeting you all and seeing the place that you have here and seeing the community and all the cool things that are happening in the classes here that I visited. So I'm really inspired, and I've been telling Marina this, that it's so good to see so many people moving through the hallways and in and out of classes and everything, and it's just like, there's some of that from the pandemic that I kind of miss, but also it's just very, very refreshing to see it. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna just move this over here like that. There. Okay, so my name is Brian Harper, and I just wanted to start with this image because this image, to me, is a sort of reminder and also an image that when I look at it, I feel so fortunate to have worked with some amazing people throughout my career so far, and I'm really just honored. You know, I can't really explain it any other way other than that, but I feel like I'm very lucky to have been around some amazing people. So that's me on the left, and this is an image that was taken at the NCCA conference several years ago. To my left, that's Rahela Filsufi and Sam Johnson, both of whom were Artaxis board members at the time this photo was taken. And in the middle, that's Kathy Garcia, Natalia Arbelayes, and Raven Halfmoon. All three of them are Artaxis fellows, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the Artaxis Fellowship in a minute. And then on the far right, that's Salvador Jimenez Flores, another board member at the time. And actually, let me get my remote here. And so I've moved around quite a bit. I was born in Michigan, lived there until I was 10. My family then moved to Rhode Island. I lived in Boston, lived in Maine. It was in Boston that I got into ceramics. I was a photography major before that. Then I finished my long undergraduate career, I guess if you call it that, at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. Then I did my graduate work at University of Iowa in Iowa City. I taught at Baylor University for a couple years before I went to Indiana University Southeast, where I teach now. This photo is of me nearly 30 years ago. And in this photo, I was about 19 years old. I had just left high school, and I moved to Boston. And I went to the Art Institute of Boston as a photographer. And it was a moment in my career, in my life, that was so informative because I was around all of these exciting people that I could learn from, and I was like a sponge back then. I mean, I'd like to think I'm still a sponge in some ways, but it just kind of like looking back on it, even though I didn't finish my degree there, I left there before I was done because I got into a different material and I wanted to go somewhere else that had a larger program for that. But it was one of the most influential times of my life. And I was around people like this. This is Greg Zosky in the middle and Eric James on the left, and or on the right. And it really was kind of this moment where I started to kind of see a broader world, and I started to see, kind of start to develop kind of what I wanted to do with my work. And throughout the time of me moving to different places, I wanted to, sorry, I was just going to start that timer. I've been really lucky to be around some great teachers, and it is really through them that I've developed my own practice, my own way of thinking, my own sort of professional identity. And I don't mean to say that I've sought all these people out. I just have been fortunate to sort of stumble into their lives, and I think I've tried to remain open to accepting, their feedback and listening to the way that they go about their lives and the way that they work. Christopher James was the head of the photography department at the Art Institute of Boston. And again, even while I was only there for 2 years, 19, 20, I still think about him when I'm making decisions about how I want to run my program in ceramics, all these years later. And then on the right side of the slide, this is Don Bendel, Paula Rice, and Ellen Tibbetts, all of which were at NAU, Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona. And they were all just really amazing people that have all shaped me in part to who I am right now. Probably the most influential person in my life, sort of next to my own parents, would be Don Bendel. And Don Bendel was the head of the ceramics program. I had worked with him for several years and continued to work with him on different projects even after I left and I graduated. And he was part of the reason why I started to feel like I wanted to teach. When I first went to NAU, I wanted to be a studio potter and make pots and sell them and live in the forest somewhere. My motivations were much different than they are right now. When I worked with him, after a long time of working with him, I started to see in his life that he had a way of bringing in his artwork, his professional activity, his family, his dedication to community, his students, his teaching, all into this synthesis of a whole. And it was at that point that I started to think that, maybe I want more than to make pots in the forest. There's something against that, because I'm also envious of those people too. But I just wanted something a little bit more. And so, he really kind of changed my path, and I started to sort of be more interested in teaching and more interested in the concept of maybe running an educational space like I do at my school now. And I saw in him that there was this whole, that all these different things were part of this larger thing. And I've tried to model that in my own life by recognizing that all of these things are really important to me. So my work is important, my family, my field, my teaching, my peers, my activity in the community. All these things are sort of like spokes on a wheel. And I'm not to say that I have figured out this life balance thing. My wife will be the first one to tell you that I'm horrible at it. Some of these things I said something in one of the other classes yesterday, that this wheel is kind of a jagged wheel sometimes. It's not perfectly round. But I do feel like in the end, I kind of want my career to be about a lot of different things. And I want my career to be about my work, but also about all of these things here that are important to me. My wife is also an artist. She has a background in ceramics, but she is a digital media projection artist. And this is one of her large-scale projections. This is a 5-story building in Łódź, Poland. And this is a moving image that is made from several projectors that are mapped together. And her work has allowed us to do some amazing things and go to some amazing places, all of which have affected me in making me who I am now. So she is an inspiration to me. Her work is an inspiration, and it has been part of my sort of formative experience, as an artist. So again, I teach at Indiana University Southeast. I run the ceramics program there, and so here's just a little bit about the program. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to show a ton of images of work or anything, but I do have this website called claybucket.com that I built for the program for students to access resources in the program. There's everything from like glaze recipes to demonstration videos and all kinds of cool content there. I made a resident artist position at IU Southeast. Right now, my resident artist is Lalana Fedorshak, and this is a position that rotates every couple of years and is a way for me to bring new voices into the program. And also, it has helped energize me in my teaching and energize the program as a whole. I also have an active visiting artist program, and I have a post-baccalaureate program that I started there. And those are students that have already graduated from somewhere else, and now they're coming there to work on their portfolio for whatever the next thing is. So whether that's graduate school or residencies, or they're going to be a studio potter, everybody's kind of working towards sort of different things there, but they also help energize the program. And then in the bottom right, that's an image that my students made of me as a joke when I was imagining a way of solar firing by shooting a dry ceramic mug around the sun, and as it came back, it would get fired as it's shooting around the sun. And so they made this of me. A big thing for me in my program at IU Southeast is community. And I really work hard to foster that and support that. It's been my experience that my students tend to make better work when they're supported and they're in a community that also supports them. And so whether it's through visiting artist events that we have, firings of kills and things like that, I really try to spend a lot of time to kind of support that and generate that. It's part of who I am. I really feel engaged in this aspect of the program, so it's very important to me. The Dirtbags are the art club that I founded there, and so we have embraced the name Dirtbags in our program. So one of the things about what I feel strong, one of the things I feel strongly about is finding and sort of being open to taking in influences from a lot of different places. So as artists, we're obviously influenced by other artists, okay, that makes sense. But I think it's important to recognize that there's also influences that come from different places. And this is Aaron Swartz, who was a computer programmer, a writer, author, an activist. And he, even at a very young age as a teenager, started to write really influential internet software that was doing things like it was some of the very first code that made Reddit. He worked on Creative Commons, which is a licensing, like a public sharing licensing thing. Demand Progress, an organization that was a political activist organization. He also wrote this website that was where anybody could make a page and type information that they were knowledgeable about, and it would save, and it was a way for a community to generate and archive information. Sounds like Wikipedia, right? It was years before Wikipedia, and he wrote that as a teenager. And so anyway, one of the things that I learned from him, or that kind of sort of has been an impactful thing for me, is this quote where he said, "It's not enough to live in the world as it is." And it's such a simple little statement, a simple moment of it's not enough to live in the world as it is. So what that means to me is that when we pull from our communities, we pull that energy, or we pull energy from our family, our friends, our communities, our classes, whatever it is, we have an obligation to give back. We have an obligation, we're a part of that, we took from it, let's give back, and let's change things. And let's just not be in the world as it is, let's contribute to it in some way. And so one of the ways that I've tried to do that throughout my life is through this nonprofit organization that I founded called Artaxis. I founded this in 2005, and it was very small in the beginning. It was just a little thing. It was 10 to 15 pages on this little website. Nobody was looking at it, thankfully, because the website was terrible back then in 2005. But the good thing is that most websites were really bad back then. But now it has grown into a much more broader organization. I formed it into a 501c3 nonprofit. So it's federally recognized. It's also a state nonprofit in Indiana and Minnesota. And now there's a board of directors, and our mission is basically artists helping artists. We're interested in doing things that help promote artists and to affect our community by making it easier for people to find artists online. And so every artist on the website has a page like this. There are nearly 1,000 members in over 50 countries in all 50 states. And traffic from the website is global. So people are visiting the website from all over the world every day. And it's been this thing that has a life of its own now. I feel like I'm holding on to this thing that is just flying through space and time. But the organization is peer-reviewed, so it's one of the largest peer-reviewed collections online of ceramics online. The current members of the organization jury the applicants when they come in. So if you apply to be on the website, 7 randomly selected members are selected to then jury that application. And so it's a non-hierarchical blind jury process. And the non-hierarchical here means that anybody on the website, whether they've been in the field for 50 years or 10, has the same vote, has the same say in that process. And I believe strongly in that idea. I believe in democracy. I believe in the idea of democracy. But I think in this case, what it does is it brings in younger voices earlier in the process. There is a tendency in the ceramics field, and I suppose all art fields, that there are these sort of people that have been around for a long time, and they're sort of like going to say, they're going to bless this work by saying, I have selected this work in this exhibition because I have been in the field for 40 years, and I know it all, And in this process, there can be somebody that's been in the field for 40 years that also is next to somebody that might still be in maybe graduate school, and their votes are counted the same. So this has been a vital part of the organization as a whole. We also founded the Artaxis Fellowship, which is a way that we can support early career artists by sending them to summer workshops and residency programs. And this was founded in 2015. We brought our first fellow in 2016 from Theaster Gates did a talk at the NCCA conference, and he gave a charge to the audience there. And I was sitting in that audience with Sam Johnson, who was a friend of mine and board member at the time. And his charge was, let's diversify the voices in our field and let's get more people involved and to see, and to value those voices and bring those voices in as a way to make our field better. And so as I walked out of that auditorium that day, my friend and I, Sam, by the time we got to the door, we had hatched the idea for the Artaxis Fellowship. We raised money and sent our first fellow, Natalia Arbelayas, to Watershed Center for the Ceramic Arts in 2016. We then sent Soyu Nui to Haystack, and then at that point we developed a partnership with Haystack, and now we are sending 2 people a year for summer workshops. So this is Kathy Garcia and Raven Halfmoon, and Dante Hayes and Moises Salazar, that were our 2018 and 2019 fellows. Nyasha Matamombe and Nicole McLaughlin, our 2020 fellows, and our 2021 fellows were Jane King and Eugene Adji. All of these people are amazing individuals, and this is one of the most rewarding things that I've been a part of, and the opportunity to meet these people has been one of the highlights of my career. And I'm just so thankful for the opportunity, to be a part of that. Along the lines of the Artaxis Fellowship, we also have a curatorial fellowship that is similar with the Artaxis Fellowship. With the Artaxis Fellowship, we're interested in supporting young artists. Here, we're interested in supporting young curators, early career curators. And this has a little bit more of a mentorship sort of component. So we pair an early career curator with an established curator through a mentorship opportunity for them to design a show and build a show and write a statement, curatorial statement, under the, well, I shouldn't say under the direction of, but with, in consultation with our mentor. This last year was Gerald Brown, and Gerald was working with Angelique Viscarando-Laboy, who is our curatorial mentor. We do a lot of different programs. We do exhibitions, and we do this event called Artaxis Conversations. And for this Artaxis Conversations has changed a little bit in different years. We kind of tweak and modify it based on the programming that we want to do. This was one of my favorite events that we've done, where we designed this thing where we wanted to have 24 artists that were live streaming about their work from their studios or their homes in 16 different countries for 12 hours straight. And they did 30-minute spots back to back to back all day long from places like Iran, Thailand, Ireland, Botswana, literally all over the world. And it was so exciting to see that take place, to see artists sharing information. We, in Mara's class earlier, we talked about the internet being a platform at its core for sharing information and to giving us the sort of shoulders to stand on to see farther. And I think that's what these types of things do, is they allow us to learn from the ceramic artist in Iran or Botswana, and learn on a live sort of basis. And so another project that I've been working on lately, like most days in the last several weeks, definitely, even yesterday was working on this, last night after dinner, was this fundraiser for an Artaxis member that we have in Ukraine. This is Alexander Marashnichenko in the image on the top left, with his 3 and 5-year-old daughter. So after the invasion, on the next morning after I heard about the invasion of Ukraine, I knew that he lived outside of Kharkiv, and so many of you have heard about that town now because of what's happening there. And I emailed him just a little email and said, I hope everything's going okay. Like, I hope you all are safe, basically. And he sent me this picture here. That's from his backyard, and that is the bombing that was happening around Kharkiv on that morning. And you can see here they sheltered in his basement for a couple months. Then they've been moving around Ukraine trying to keep his family safe. And amazingly, during that time of the last several months of moving around Ukraine, he's been making work. He's been making these drawings that are really beautiful. Some of them are just ballpoint ink drawings. And then he put me in touch with his sister, who lives in Tampa, Florida. His sister's name is Daria. And Daria and I started to hatch this plan of how we're going to help him get out of Ukraine and get to the United States and reunite with his sister in Florida and maybe go to school, for ceramics. He has an earlier degree, and so she mentioned this to him. He shipped these 39 drawings to her, and we're going to use the Artaxis platform to raise money to help his family get out of the area and to the United States. They have just recently crossed the border into Poland just a few days ago, and they left everything behind. They left their home, the studio, the car, all the kids' toys, everything is gone. And so we're gonna do this and raise money, and hopefully we're launching like next week. Like, what day is it? Tuesday? Maybe a week from today, hopefully. But this is one of those things that I just feel so strongly about. And so I'm sort of like, in a way, pitching it to you, saying like, if you see this, please consider supporting it. But also, it is just one of those things that I believe in strongly about artists getting together and helping other artists. And the opportunity to use the Artaxis platform to do that is a great honor for me, and I don't ever take it lightly. So I don't do all these things alone with Artaxis. This is the board of directors, the current board of directors. We have Kwok Pong, Bobby So, Adam Chow, Casey Whittier, Jared Pfeiffer, Dita Mert, Jen-Chi Wu, Natasha Hovey, and Renata Cassiano Alvarez. I'm technically not on the board of directors, but it made better sense to have a square image right here. So I'm the executive director. So a little bit about my work, my professional practice, sort of beyond Artaxis. I'm a working artist. I've been making things now for 25 years, over 25 years. And so for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about all the different bodies of work that I've made, but I'm going to talk about some of the highlights. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about some of the works that have been really impactful for me and have changed the way that I've been thinking about my work. And so this is some of the bodies of work. These are some of the bodies of work I've made. I do envy the artists that are able to sort of have one linear path. I have not had a linear path. I have jumped around a lot, and I think it's just part of who I am. You know, everybody's different. So, but where I'm going to start is about halfway through graduate school. I was making this work here. These are large objects that are sort of inspired by early stoneworks. The image on the left is almost exactly the same height as I am, and this was the kind of thing that I was making. I was really engaged with at the time, and during this process, like kind of right near as I was nearing the end of this body of work, I was invited to enter work or to submit artwork for a T-bowl show, a wood-fired T-bowl show. I never really made T-bowls before, but I felt strongly about this show. And so I took a brick from the wood-firing kiln at school, one of the wood-firing kilns, and I carved this T-bowl out of it. So I took this brick that was already fired, it's a ceramic, and I took a little stone carving chisel and I carved this little inside, and you can't see the foot ring, but there's this little foot ring underneath there. It's by no means the best piece I've ever made, but it's probably been the most influential piece I have ever made. Ever since I made this piece, I saw this new raw material in my hand that was different than any other raw material I had really thought of. The raw material was ceramic instead of clay. You know, clay, when it's fired, becomes this material called ceramic. And it never occurred to me that I could start with the ceramic as a starting point for making work. And so it launched me on a path that I would, in some cases, argue I'm kind of still on today, because almost every body of work after this piece has been made by post-firing assembly. So I've done something to it after the firing. So for me, the firing is oftentimes one of the earlier parts of the process. I went into this thing where I started making these big blocks of clay and firing them and carving them with stone carving chisels. You know, I just was working exactly like a stone carver, but I had this stone that wasn't really stone. It didn't really feel like clay either. But it allowed me to have this new thing to me. And so this is the way that I worked for quite a long time. I would have these large blocks of clay. They're fired very slowly. Some of these blocks of clay are 2 feet thick. They would fire for over a week. And the color difference there that you see is the layers of clay as it's fired inside. It doesn't get as hot, so the color changes. And so I was carving these pieces and making these works that in the body of work called the New Myth series. And the New Myth series was really about the idea of forming a sort of personal mythology that would help give structure to the unknown or the unknown world, or something that you don't know about. You know, kind of inventing these spaces and these tools to sort of imagine this other world, you know. And I don't mean to say that I don't believe in truth. I'm a truth seeker. But I do think that there's something very valuable about the idea of imagining about something and using that imagination as a way to help structure the unknown world. Some of these pieces are very large. This piece on the right, on your right, is about 25 feet long. The piece on the left is, I think, about 14 feet or 10 feet long, maybe. And so they were, because they were fired with, they were made with this other material, this carved ceramic, they had this kind of weird little zone of being this other material that was partly a jumping off point for the viewer. So when the viewer looked at these, they weren't really sure what it was. It didn't really look like stone. It kind of sort of looked volcanic in a way, but you could kind of tell it wasn't one of those things. And that was that first kind of jumping off point to kind of like a wonderment of the object and what it was for. So that was partly why they're sort of referencing these sort of tools and different things. There was a body of work kind of in the middle here that was called the Informatics series. And I'm just going to show these two pictures from it. It was kind of a sort of a body of work that sort of straddled a couple other bodies of work. But after this series, I started on this new series called Oscillation Series. And in this work, I started thinking about a life lived as a series, an infinite number of little points and moments, that your life is basically so many little tiny moments, and any of those moments can be super influential and can change who you are. And you never know when those moments are going to come. Sometimes they're really positive, sometimes they're negative. Sometimes it might be something amazing that Marina or Mara say in class and has changed your outlook on life. But so this kind of idea of these small moments in time of making big changes is sort of popularized by this thing called the butterfly effect. And the butterfly effect comes from chaos theory. And the butterfly effect says, in essence, that a dynamic system that is connected through time is made up of all these different moments, that early events in that chain of events can have drastic effects and have effects that are impossible to predict. So some people have heard about this butterfly effect, saying like a butterfly flaps its wings in one part of the world and forms a tornado in another part of the world. The idea is that there's no way to predict those moments and what they do and how they can affect your life or any sort of dynamic system. So I wanted to make an object that referenced that. And so this object here is made up of 236 parts that were extruded from a clay extruder and fired first, and then I joined them in one continuous line. So there's no beginning and end here. I mean, there was a beginning and end when I built it, but I connected the lines so that there's no beginning or end. And the idea with this object was I wanted to have a shape that I could think about one of those 236 parts, moving just a tiny bit, like 5 degrees. And it would be an imperceptibly small change for that one little thing, but that little change would ripple throughout the whole thing and create an object that would then no longer look the same. And it's kind of an analogy of going through life and having a moment where your life has changed forever. So that was kind of the idea with these pieces. That first one there was a larger one. It was about 6 or 7 feet across. I did make some smaller ones. This is only 10 inches. This is the one that's on the poster. And so this one's a little bit larger, about 2 feet by 2 feet. And this is also a continuous line. So they're all connected. All these different parts are connected. And I was really interested in these pieces with the idea that every one of those moments is important to the whole. So every piece has a place, in the same way that all these moments that make up who you are important, even if they seem insignificant. And then around that time, I was invited to, or I had the opportunity to work at, I did a short-term residency at a place called Teethon 3D. And Teethon 3D is a ceramic 3D printing company that's sort of at the forefront of ceramic 3D printing. And this is where I was learning to do some powder clay printing. I've been into 3D printing for quite a long time, like over a decade. And I'll show a little bit at the end of the talk here, but this was an opportunity that I had to kind of think about some new work. And again, it sort of like I made this work that, again, was not great, but it changed the way that I was working. And the image on the right, I was interested in the idea of a digitally designed stack of plates, and then using a clay 3D printer to create these stack of plates that were sort of mediated from my hand, and sort of the tools were sort of separating from the clay plate that I would have normally thrown to my hand. When I got home, I looked around my studio and I noticed that I didn't have a clay 3D printer. So I remade the piece on the right, and I went on a search for the plainest, most boring pots you could find, and I found them at JCPenney. And so at JCPenney, I found these plates. They're called the Home Collection plates. And this piece, again, like that carved piece, is not very good. It does not look very good, but it was the catalyst that sort of allowed me an opportunity to rethink some pieces that I was making and create this new body of work that I was calling the Scaffolding series. These are pieces that are architectural. They're built around the Home Collection series. And in part, I'm kind of playing off of the word home and thinking about how JCPenney sort of co-opts that word in this case to sell these objects that, in my view, are sort of very different than what you would associate with a home. You know, if you think of your home, you think of, you know, the people in it, the smells, the color, the animals, like hopefully pets, not like raccoons. But you think about all these like interesting intangible things, and these plates have nothing to do with that. They're these white, sort of really plain, they're void of any of those intangibles. And so I was interested in sort of that kind of dichotomy and making these pieces that are sort of architectural, that kind of house these plates, and also kind of thinking about the scaffolding here as a reference to something that is being repaired or worked on or studied. And I would spend like months on these pieces. These pieces are really complicated. All the pieces, the individual parts are fired first, and then I cut them and I glue them together in this really slow, painstaking process that is sort of mind-numbing. I would say that it was like exciting when I start them and exciting when I finish, but the 8 weeks in the middle are pretty rough. And so from that one piece, from the 3D printing thing that I did, you know, that again, like that other piece was not good at all, but I feel like it sort of kicked off this other body of work. And so you can kind of see the mug in the middle there. This piece here was the fastest piece that I ever made in this body of work, and it took 4 weeks, and I worked on it every day, all day. I did an artist workshop at the Red Lodge Clay Center in Red Lodge, Montana, and I did this big, long workshop, and I only made one piece. And this is it. There's over 3,000 parts of this in this piece. I counted the rows and added up the total. And it's not that big. It's only like this big, 12 inches. But you can kind of see how the objects are sort of kind of housed inside there. And this is sort of my unofficial collaboration with JCPenney. You can say unofficial because I didn't have permission or anything, but they did like one of my pictures on Instagram one time, so I feel like they're involved in some small way. This is the last piece of that series, and was one of those pieces where I was really just kind of digging into, highlighting the purpose, sort of these plates and that word home collection. Shortly after this, they changed that logo. I always liked this rectangle around the home, and they didn't even ask me. Couldn't believe it. And so, again, I think that over the years, too, there's been this kind of move to a very slow working process, and it is kind of hard to deal with it from time to time, but there's something that's happening in my brain or something that is just making me kind of work this way, and so I've been just kind of following this path. around this time, actually during the process of making these objects here, I was invited to speak at the Skanseram conference in Denmark. It's in a small town called Tonle, Denmark. And on one of the slow day at the end of the conference, I went up to a town called Skane in the very top tip of Denmark. And I, just mostly to see what was up there. I've heard it was a beautiful place. And I came across these bunkers, these old World War II bunkers that were sinking and being sort of swallowed by the ocean. And the reason why I'm telling you the story that I saw these during the process of making the scaffolding series is that sometimes these changes in the work happen a little bit more slowly than they might seem when I talk about them here. I saw these, and then it didn't really click where I wanted to go with it for a couple years, for 2 to 3 years. I kept thinking about them though, and I couldn't get it out of my mind about how these like objects of permanence and impenetrability and these objects of aggression and war, once they're not habited anymore, the earth swallows them up. You know, it's like water, sand, and time, and the earth sort of reclaims them. And I think that's just such a beautiful idea. And so I also did a short-term residency in Iceland. I had this grant opportunity to go there, and I worked in Reykjavik as part of the Mid-Atlantic Ceramic Exchange, which was a group that Andy Shaw put together from LSU with a Icelandic artist. And again, found some bunkers there, and things started to click a little bit more. And I started to think a lot about what happens in our sort of ideology right now, our political framework, our political thought process, and thinking about these really entrenched ideas, and thinking about how, you know, they seem really entrenched, but when the landscape around them changes, then your viewpoints can change. And so I started then making these bunker series works and kind of making these pieces that were listing and kind of sinking into these terrains that I'm hoping are looking like shifting plains and shifting landscapes. And one of the things about the bunker idea that I'm interested in is that the bunker is sort of at once a offensive, but also a sort of a defensive thing. You know, there's a protection, but there's also an aggression. But they owe themselves, their power owes themselves from being inhabited. And so for me, I'm thinking about that in terms of what's happening now in our political world, where we're thinking just so dynamically about things, just like one or the other, you know? And I'm kind of thinking about this sort of bunker mentality, this sort of sheltering, you know? And so that's where this work is coming from. And so I have started, so this is a little bit larger piece. These pieces are just as slow and painstaking as the scaffolding pieces. But one thing that I'm doing here that I'm going to talk about in just a minute is I'm 3D printing molds, and I'm pressing the clay into these molds. And that's how I'm making the actual bunker shapes. Now, some of these are made with wood. This particular one here is made with wood. This is made with a really dark black clay that I love. And so I start from the bottom, and I just slowly work my way up. I use an epoxy called PC7, which is a very slow-setting epoxy. I mix black stain with it. And I like the fact that the epoxy sort of looks like gaskets almost, like these connection points. And I really like accentuating the fact that they are built this way and that they are built out of all these different little moments, these different kind of objects. And then recently, well, over the pandemic, I was able to take a class on machine learning. And so I created a data set of all of these bunkers, pictures of bunkers, that I scanned I got from online sources. And I worked with this technology called StyleGAN. And this was a class that I took that was taught by Derek Au of glazy.org. And I took my data set and I set it up to be trained in this algorithm. And the algorithm basically made these, what it's trying to do is it's trying to make new bunker shapes. that don't exist, and it's trying to sort of fake itself by making these shapes, and it makes these beautiful videos. And this is the machine basically trying to find new bunker shapes that are from my data set, that are sort of inspired by the data set. And so what I did is I took those videos and I started digging into them and looking at the still images and thinking that I wanted to then create some of these new bunker shapes. The computer has generated this bunker on the right from the data set. It doesn't exist. And so I was really inspired by that idea for this work. And so what I started to do is I started using some pretty rudimentary design software, and I started making these digital models of these bunkers. And this is a software called Tinkercad. It's super easy, it's free, it's a web-based software. You don't need some high-power computer to do it. And it's very sort of approachable. I'm learning a software called Fusion 360, but that's a little bit more complicated. But what I did is I started making these bunkers that were inspired by the machine learning bunkers, and then I would then make the model in sort of reverse. So I'm making a mold. Okay, so I take the model, I build a thing over it, I subtract the model out and create the negative shape of it. And then I'm printing them on this very rudimentary $250 3D printer. My point of this, saying that the software is free and the printer is cheap, is that sometimes I feel like these technologies can be a little overwhelming at first, but there's options to make what I think are cool things with some really pretty basic stuff. And so this was a cheap 3D printer. And then I printed these molds. I'm still working on this, so I'm printing them. I just printed one before I came here. And then filling them with clay. So I build hollow inside. So I pinch the clay in there, sort of push it in there, and I push it all the way around, and then I build that flat across the top. This way of building is how I was building the early stonework pieces that we saw, like one of the very first pieces that I showed about my own work in this talk. Same process. I was building those with wood, pinching the clay on the inside. And so maybe I haven't come very far since then, but there's a thread there. There's a thread of building. Also, there's a thread of sort of my hand being mediated by tools. And I'm sort of making these objects from these molds. I'm powdering them with cornstarch on the inside, and that's what allows the clay to separate from the plastic mold. And one of the things that it's allowed me to do is not only to visualize these forms, but to play with scale. And so you can make them really small, in addition to being big. This one here, there's a nickel on the right. Okay, so this is small. It's only like that big. It's a little hard to see in the slide. We can kind of see it, sort of the lines, So I purposely 3D print them on sort of a kind of a rough setting so that I want those lines to start to look a little bit like concrete, how concrete is cast, because I'm using that as also a reference to go back to those bunkers that I saw in Denmark and Iceland. And so this is one of the most recent pieces from this series. And so this is two different types of clay and then a wood base too. All the lighter colored pieces are wood. But you can kind of see this is a 3D printed mold, pressed clay into, and then pulled it out and fired it. And so I'm still working with the same ideas in the bunker series of these bunkers sort of listing into these shapes. But now I'm sort of also inventing the actual bunker itself through a collaboration of computer technology, 3D printing, and my own imagination. And so just a little bit about the way that I build these forms. You saw the way that I build the 3D forms, or the 3D printed forms, but I have a 3D printed extruder die. An extruder is just a tool that you just crank down and it squishes clay through a mold. And in this case, I just 3D printed a series of 9 squares. And you can see here on the larger image, I just have these long pieces come out, let them dry, and I kind of snap them into these pieces. And then what I do is I glue them. I put little dabs of that PC7 glue on each one of them. And I usually fill a board like that and then put those on the piece. I have used the same fettling knife for all of those pieces. This same fettling knife has glued tens of thousands of pieces. And sometimes I tell my students, like, all you gotta do is wipe the epoxy off, and your tools make it. And then here's just a couple process images of me building these forms. And again, they're just really slow, painstakingly slow. But I will often work on 6, 7, or even 8 at a time. Because what I do is I can only put a few rows on at a time because the pieces start to sag. And it's similar like these newer ones here on this one on the left. I want them to look like they're falling over, but not actually fall over. So it's a line there that I'm always trying to walk. And this is just an image of my studio. I wish that I had this beautiful, great studio to show you, but it's a basement studio that is kind of messy. Marina and I were talking the other day about keeping a clean studio, and I keep a very clean studio at school with my students. I wish my own studio was that clean. But I just kind of wanted to show like what it looks like, you know. This is a pretty average day. I have some of the bunker shapes here. I also have been hand building some bunker shapes too, although I haven't really done much with those yet. And it's just in my basement, so I have a very short commute. And that helps because I have a 2-year-old daughter now, and I just wanted to put a picture in here because a couple of students said that they wanted to see a picture of my daughter. And one of the things that I have felt with spending time with my daughter is that all of the work that I'm doing with Artaxis, with my own work, with running the studio at school, teaching and all that kind of stuff, it can be stressful. You know, it gets me down sometimes, it's a grind. But then when my daughter laughs or my daughter tells me she loves me, it all goes away. And so there's something really special about those moments, I think, where clarity comes in, and I feel a sense of clarity in my life. So I really appreciate you all being here. I appreciate the opportunity to share the work with you, and I have learned so much about your school and just very inspired by everything that I see here and the energy that I see in the classes and the faculty here. So thank you again to Marina and Mara for letting me crash your classes, and I appreciate it very much. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. We have some time for some questions. Any questions from the audience?
Would you ever do, because the kind of scaffolding with the bunkers, would you ever do those at like a bigger scale? Because they seem very small. Would you ever try and challenge yourself to make them these very tall and painstaking?
Yeah, so the question is, would I ever make the bunkers on a larger scale? And the reason I'm kind of laughing a little bit is that I have a proposal at school right now to have a research fellowship to work on exactly that thing, to make these much larger. To be honest, I'm not sure how they, I'm curious to see what they would do. One of the things I'm interested in doing is having them come off the floor. And we had talks in the 3D class yesterday, sort of talking about whether or not we need a pedestal with some of the works. And so I'm sort of thinking about some of those same issues in my own work and thinking about the scale. Some of the oscillation pieces are glued together in a similar way that I'm gluing these pieces together now. Well, this piece right here, actually. And there is a lot of technical challenge with the large scale that isn't there with the small scale. But I am interested, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm interested in moving in that direction with some of the stuff. Yeah.
You talked a lot about how influential the professors and teachers were in your life. Were they the reason why you went into education, or was there a different reason why you went into education?
Yeah, so the question is about the inspiration that I got from professors and whether or not that was a sort of catalyst to go into education. And it definitely was with Don Bendel, because I wasn't really thinking about that as part of my career when I first went there. And I saw the value that he got from it and sort of the interactions that he got from it. So it was sort of a little bit of a conscious decision at the time, and which I think is a little different than how some people end up in our field. But for me, it started to be pretty like a focus. Yeah.
I have a question. It's more of a technical question. You were talking about extruding those clay,
Yep.
not the tubes, the square ones. And what kind of clay did you use? Because you said you let it air dry.
Oh, I just let it dry before it's fired.
Oh, before it's.
Yeah.
Okay, because I have been looking for like an air dried clay that I could use, but it always crumbles.
Oh, yeah, that's it. So I don't really have any experience with air dry clay. So I don't have a lot to add for the technical
Okay.
side. But yeah, what I do with the extrusions is, because the tubes are extruded too, and then the little pieces are. There's also some of this oscillation series that is much larger that have, their tubes are like that. And I didn't show those. But there were a whole bunch that were larger. But the same process is there where I'm using this extruder. It's just a really rudimentary tool, actually. It's just like a tube with a plunger, and you put your clay in there and you have a extruder die, and the die could be anything you want. So it could be metal or wood, or in my case, 3D printed. And then I extrude the clay through there. And actually, like I did this residency at a sewer pipe factory in Logan, Ohio, and it was like the short, like couple-week long thing where we were working in this sewer pipe factory that was built in the 1890s, and they were extruding all this clay, like sewer pipes, right? And I went into this room, and it was like this huge room of all these different, they were curved, they like, to go around corners for sewer pipe. And I was like, how do you get them all the same angle? And he's like, oh, you just have the same person do it. Same person, like just, when it comes out, he goes, chick, chick, chick. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty good idea. So, similar technology. Yeah.
So are those extruded, like the cylindrical tube pieces, are they hollowed or are they solid?
They're hollow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Keep them from not folding, because when I would extrude bigger tubes like that, I was having an issue trying to curve them, they'd almost fold in on themselves.
Yeah, like when you lay them flat, they would fold.
And then when you try and curve them, they kind of crease in the center instead of going round. Sometimes they just start to kind of fold.
Yeah. The way that I would do, when I would extrude those, the way that I would do it is just like the person that I saw at the sewer pipe factory, I would just bend them slowly so I'm pushing it down on one end and kind of just bending it. And the way that I would make these is I would just make way more than I need, and so I can pick and choose from the sizes that I want, because I fired them first, and then I put them together. So I would just have like twice as many as I need, and then I would have an idea of the shape that I wanted, and then I would pick and choose the shapes that I wanted from that. I think that they weren't folding maybe because I might have been extruding them a little stiffer. Like if the clay is too wet, it does have a tendency to kind of sag. And then I would lay them down on a thin piece of foam so that I wouldn't get a flatness from the table when I laid them on their edge. So you might try that. Yeah. Yeah.
And this is a question not so technical, but more about your nonprofit work. And I was pretty interested in what you were describing about your kind of global reach with this artist network. And I'm curious if you've had any experience, not just with the professional artist community, but if that trickles into younger group work. So I'm thinking about younger artists that might be, school-age kids in high school and so forth. Do you have any reach in that sort of elementary to middle school level?
We don't, but that's been a big topic of conversation, of trying to figure that out a little bit more. We do sponsor an award at the annual K-12 ceramic show at the NCCA conference, and then we promote those pieces on our social media and everything. And we typically award pieces that are in grade school. And so we're really interested in doing more of that. To be honest, it's been a little bit of a logistical hurdle for us, like how do we do this? We're also a very sort of distributed organization. So our board of directors are in 3 different time zones, sometimes more than that. And so we're very spread out, and it's been a challenge for an organization that doesn't have like a single home base. Like how do we operate on a level that we would need to operate in a locale? Like, you know what I mean? And so we're working on it, and it's something that we feel strongly about. One of the things that the idea is to kind of utilize the network of artists that are spread all over the place, and to say, okay, we have a cluster, say, of Artaxis members in Kansas City or something, and what can we do? Can we make a partnership with some of the schools there? And maybe those artists go in and demonstrate work or meet with the kids there about work, and we could kind of take advantage of that group there, Yeah.
Interested in the bunker series, in your process, the algorithm you allude to that takes these images you built in the data set, is that something you do, or is that a collaborative thing, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, so the question is about the software and the computer side of things, whether or not that was something that I invented, right? No, it wasn't. The StyleGAN thing is invented by these tech people. I think that it came from NVIDIA, the company that makes video cards, computer stuff. And so a lot of that technology is being put out for people to tinker with, to try and experiment with. And so we worked with what are called Colab notebooks, which is like a Google Colab. It's like it's a little hard to explain, but basically it's a series of commands that you can edit and change, and you input different things to it. And so we were working with existing Colab notebooks that were partly authored by the person who taught the course, Derek Au. But he was kind of pulling from a lot of different sources. So I don't have the technical expertise yet to get into the weeds of how that code works, but maybe someday. I just thought about another thing for your question about the working with school-age kids. We have worked with other organizations so we've done some partnerships that have helped organizations, like we've raised money with them to do different programming in schools, so that we're not doing the actual program, but we're using the platform to do that. And one of those organizations was Juxtaposition Arts in Minneapolis, and we did a fundraiser at an exhibition that we did that we had Artaxis members that donated work, and then we sold it at the opening, and we raised something like $5,000. And then they used it, and they are an organization that focuses on arts programming in for inner city youth in Minneapolis. And then we did another partnership with the Women and Girls Foundation in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And that's not all school age, but it partly they work in that arena. And we did another same thing. We did donated work. We raised money. So that's one way that we're kind of extending into that area, but not actually in it ourselves. Kind of forgot about that. I sometimes talk about the partnerships with Artaxis, but to be honest, I took it out so I could talk about Alexander Marashnichenko in Ukraine. So.
We have time for maybe one more question. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a two-part question. So if I'm not mistaken, PC7, the molded material you used for the scaffolding project, is that something you experimented? Because you mentioned using a dark stain in that as well, just to match the material of the clay or the lettering as well.
Yeah, so PC7 is a two-part epoxy that's a really thick epoxy. It's almost like the consistency of a wet clay. And it's by itself, it's really kind of a dark gray. But pretty early on, I wanted to make sure it had a really rich, dark black color. And so I just experimented with black stain. And I don't really measure it, though. I just kind of do it by eye because I'm always making different amounts of it, different little blobs for how much time I think I have. But I really like working with it because it's a material that, it's a very slow setting epoxy. It's very strong. But it does slowly get stiffer over the course of many hours. And so you can some people on purpose will mix it and then wait for a couple hours so it's more viscous. There's also another complement PC material called PC11, which is white. And a lot of people use PC11 and stain it with different colors. Like my purpose for these are black, but you can take PC11 and stain it with all kinds of different stains, even liquid stains, and get pinks and blues and green and put glitter in it, you know. But it is an interesting material. It does kind of have a little bit of a home in ceramics because I think so many things break in ceramics. So there's a little bit of like, kind of most people in ceramics know about PC7, just mostly from fixing things. Whereas I use it as a sort of a visual part of the work. Yeah.
And then the structural aspects, and I believe it's the same project as the scaffolding. The architectural structures that mold like the JCPenney plates and molds. What inspired you to get those architectural forms? And maybe was it part of the software you used that you were able to get those exact items that formed around to, I guess, almost center the ceramic?
Yeah. Well, okay, so there are a few different things. One thing I was looking to make at least some reference to a home architecture with the forms. They're not all exactly that, but there's an influence there. I actually don't use software. I didn't use software at all for those pieces. So what I would do is I would sketch out basically what I wanted, and then I would just work with some of the configurations of the patterns of the little blocks, and I would have lots of different sizes that I had long ones, little short ones, and things like that. And then I would just kind of work with them and try to figure out exactly what I was doing, you know. And I could kind of only think a few rows ahead. Like I had a general idea, but I was always kind of reacting to things that were happening. So I would, put a row that's this way, and then the next day I would put a row that way, and then the next row, and then I'd be like, oh, that would be really interesting to kind of do a diagonal down this way and get some diagonal movement inside that piece. I did see this really interesting exhibition that was like it was like a public works exhibition when I was in Denmark that was sort of like scaffolding a little bit. It's sort of made out of 2x4s like this. And I remember feeling like very interested in that, you know what I mean, that idea. And so I think that there's some imagery that kind of seeped into my head and is coming out through my hands with that. That's one of those things that kind of comes from, just being open and trying to just keep your eyes open to different influences. We talked a little bit in some of the class, in a class today about, or maybe it was yesterday, the days are kind of moving together a little bit, about as artists, part of our responsibility is just to stay open to things that might influence you, whether it's something that you might just walk by on the street or, just making sure that your awareness is up and that you're present, and you might be surprised by how those influences come in and affect your work. And I think to some extent that scaffolding is kind of coming from that. There's several different sources. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you in the next event.
Thanks, everyone.